Bishop Rance Allen. I stood on the banks of the Jordan. Let's listen to this.
Banks of Jordan.
Bishop Rance Allen. I stood on the banks of Jordan. We welcome you. Let me turn this down now. We are so excited what we're doing today. Let's fade that out here. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pastor Reginald S. Floyd, Reverend Floyd, and I thank God to be able to be the pastor of the great historic Jerusalem Baptist Church located in Hartsville, South Carolina. This is our Bible study moment. We've been dealing with the theme, the prophetic voice of the African American church in American history. And as I said a few weeks ago, we're going to be journeying out. And so sometimes we're not going to be at Jerusalem Baptist Church. And today we have a very distinguished guest by the name of George Frierson III. And we are in Maysville, South Carolina. I want you to hit the share and like button. We're in the historic town of Maysville, South Carolina. It is the birthplace of Mary McLeod Bethune, one of the preeminent educators and civil rights figures in the 20th century. And we're at the Maysville Museum and the Mary McLeod Bethune Learning and Cultural Center. And what room is this, Mr. Frierson? This is
the Art Gallery.
This is the Art Gallery. We have distinguished portraits of historical figures. Dr. Benjamin E. Mays, and I see Reverend Jesse Jackson, the famous astronaut from South Carolina.
Dr. Roland McNair.
Dr. Roland McNair. And next to him is the General
Fig Newton, leader of the Thunderbird Air Force team. Next to him is the Honorable James Felder, who led the contingency that buried President John F. Kennedy. Next to him is the one of two Medal of Honor recipients from World War I, Mr. Freddie Stiles, who was born in 1896 in a little place called Sandy Springs, Anderson County, South Carolina.
And what we hope to do is, when we leave, to give you a panorama view of where we're at. And we are thankful for Mr. George Frierson, who is the curator of the Maysville Museum. And as I said earlier, this is the town where Mary McLeod Bethune was born. And she would later found the Bethune-Cookman College in Daytona Beach, Florida, which is an HBCU. And Mr. Frierson is a walking historian. And he's going to tell the story, a little bit about his background. He's going to tell the story of the Stinney incident, and which I'm going to let him go into the background. But I want to introduce to some and present to others the very Honorable George Frierson III, excuse that slip of the tongue, who's going to share with us about that prophetic voice. And a prophetic voice is not something that you just find in the church. That prophetic voice can be economic, it can be political, it can be educational, it can be from a civil rights perspective. And so we have the Honorable George Frierson III, and he can tell us about his background. He has some pictures to share with us, and I'm trying to hold him up to just help him along the way. And so as the Bible says in Exodus chapter 3, when God spoke to Moses from the burning bush, he said, I've heard the cries, and I've seen the pain and the struggle. Now go down, Moses, and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. So we're going to have a prophetic voice today. George Frierson, it is yours.
Thank you, Pastor Floyd. Pastor Floyd led me into talking about the George Stinney Jr. case. And if you do not know it, George Stinney Jr. was 14 years old when he was executed in 1944, allegedly for the death of two young white girls. And I fought 10.5 years to have his name cleared because ironically, I was born 8.5 years after this incident happened in the town of Alcaloo. Okay. And so all my life, this case was talked about. And as I got older, I just started thinking about it. And I said, let me look into this. I wanted to be an attorney, so I know law. And so when I looked at what the incidents around this case, I said, oh no, this won't stand. Didn't know anything, didn't know nothing, but went out on a trek, and for 10 and a half years, I went here and there, every little piece I could get. But one of the pieces I asked for, I said, well, I need a copy of his confession. Well, as of this date, which is October the 12th, 2022, I am still waiting on a copy of that confession.
So, Mr. George Frierson, so tell me something. Now, you're from Alkaloo, South Carolina.
I was born December the 9th, 1952, in Alkaloo, South Carolina.
And so when you first heard about this case, now the Stinney case, and full disclosure, I am an attorney. I've been an attorney for like 30 years, okay? And so I practice law in New Jersey, and you know, I'm a judge, thank God, by God's grace and mercy, judge in South Carolina. I'm a municipal judge in the city of Hartsville. So full disclosure. So I want to ask you, what happened in this case? It was in the 1940s?
1944.
And he was accused of, just give me a little background.
He was accused of killing 2 young white girls who had gone out that Friday afternoon to pick some flowers. Mm-hmm. They did not return, and there was a search, was convened to look for them. And that Saturday morning, he was with his father with the search team. And he made a statement to someone, ironically, that he had seen the girls the previous day. And so around about noon on that Saturday, which would have been March the 25th, they came to his house. They took him and his older brother, Johnny Green. And they went down the road about 2 or 3 miles. They threw Johnny out the car and said, don't let the sun go down on you. Well, nigger, that's what they say, nigger. Mm-hmm. And so Johnny got so fearful that he didn't even come back home. He went and hopped a bus and went to New York and never came back to South Carolina.
And how old was
Mr. Stinney was 14.
Was 14 years old. Okay.
Born on October 21st, 1929 in Pinewood, Sumter County, South Carolina. But because of job opportunities, his father had gotten hired in Alkaloo to the lumber mill, which was hiring people at that time. And so the family, of course, moved to Alkaloo.
Okay, so tell me now, so he got arrested. There was the murder, there was a murder that took place, and he was allegedly accused of committing that murder.
He was, because he actually admitted that he had seen the girls the day before. And at that time, no one else said anything. So apparently, because he was the last one to actually say that he saw them, okay, he must have been the one who killed them. That's the conclusion they came to.
Okay. And so he was arrested, and how long did it take for a trial to take place? And
okay.
How long was the trial?
Okay, he was arrested on March the 25th, 1944. On Monday, April 24th, 1944, they had a trial. And the trial lasted from 2:30 to 5:05.
Okay, now I can ask you a question. The murder took place in what, March?
March.
And when was the trial?
31 days later.
31 days later. Did he have a lawyer?
He had someone standing in who was a tax attorney.
Wow.
Against if nothing else, a credible solicitor.
And what county was it?
This was in Clarendon County.
And who was the solicitor at the time?
Solicitor was Franklin McLeod.
Franklin McLeod. Okay. Okay.
And him and his son were the solicitor in Clarendon County for around about 60 or 65 years. So
okay.
It was kind of like the Murdochs down here.
Where like 100 years or something they've been solicitors. So the trial was approximately 30 days, and we all know you cannot prepare a defense for a capital crime in 30 days. Sometimes it takes a year, several months. You want to interview witnesses and everything. So the due process clause just burnt up. Everything was just thrown out the window. And so the trial itself lasted less than a day?
Less than 3 hours.
Less than 3 hours. They came back with, of course, what, a guilty?
With a verdict. The jury went out at 4:55. They came back at 5:05 with a verdict of guilty with no recommendation for mercy. And 25 minutes later at 5:30, the judge sentenced him to be executed on Friday, June 16th, between the hours of 7 a.m. and 7 p.m.
And tragically, he was executed.
He was executed. In 10 minutes, He was executed 10 minutes after a 21-year-old had, okay, let me get it straight. I forgot which one was executed first. But 15 minutes later, after one of them was executed, the other one was put to death.
Okay, and so you took this as a charge. This was, you wanted to make a situation right because you knew, and people talked about, it was not fair. He didn't have no semblance of a trial. It was equivalent of what they did with Jesus. It was a mockery of a trial. Travesty of justice. So what did you do? What was your first step in being a prophetic voice to say you want to rectify the Stinney case? What did you do?
I went here and there. Every place I could get, I wanted to see whether I could recreate any evidence that could have been possible to be found. Of course, when I went to the court, there was no record in the court of the case. I went to the archives in Columbia and asked them did they have a record on George Stinney Jr. They said there was none that existed.
And when did you really pick up this cause? Was it in the 70s?
2000, no, this was around about 2003, 2004.
Okay.
And, you know, I'm going to say this. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I was sent overseas to fight for the rights of people who I didn't know, who didn't know me, and they definitely didn't look like me. So I think I have the rights to fight for the rights of someone who does look like me.
That's right. Okay.
And ironically, I have his first name because he was born before me. His name was George, and my name is George.
Okay. So now what did you do? So you went to Columbia, they couldn't find no records. And so how long was this journey that you began in the early 2000s before you was able to really
accumulate enough records
yes.
to take forward, about 2.5 years.
Okay.
And at that time, I called some friends of mine, and we formed a group called A New Day. And they said, okay, we don't know exactly what you're doing, but as long as what you're doing, is right, we got your back. And I can say, thank God that I knew that there was someone physically who had my back. Now, I knew God had my back, but I could look around and see somebody who had my back. And I always give honor to them because they always stood with me. Okay. Although they didn't know everything I was doing.
Let me try to show a closer picture of, this is the youth right now, and I know that the way the camera is set, you might not be able to see it. But here's a 14-year-old who was tragically under the imprimatur of the legal system in America at that particular time in the state of South Carolina, where the system itself failed him. And you could think of another case in the 1950s of Emmett Till.
Emmett Till, 10 years later.
10 years later. Now, here was the legal process, the criminal justice system failed. In the Emmett Till cases, what you call extrajudicial, it was outside of the legal process, and yet still, in both instances, society failed these young men. Now, you have some picture you want to share with us also?
Yes, sir. Well, Pastor, there's a process when it comes to black people, and I call it minimize, vilify, and dehumanize. When a black person comes on the scene and is accused, first, he is considered as not being worthy of justice. That's to minimize you. Then they say, well, they are criminals anyway. That's to vilify you. And because, society itself doesn't embrace crooks. Mm-hmm. They vilify you, and then that makes you less than human. In fact, it amazes me sometimes when I see some of our white brothers riding around kissing their dogs, mm-hmm. which is an animal, but yet you dehumanize a black man.
Mm-hmm. So I would like to ask you, like in this process where you put forth minimize, vilify, and dehumanize, and let's understand this. This is not a cultural thing that's limited to America. All across the world, in different societies, when they want to do something that is oppressive, there are the steps that took place. We can talk about this in Nazi Germany. And so this is why the educational process, when we talk about the prophetic voice of the African American church in American history, we need to understand that its impact is worldwide. Understand that what George Frierson is saying that took place in America, understand also the connection is what took place in Nazi Germany. The same process to dehumanize the Jewish people led to them being put in concentration camp in which millions were killed. The same process: minimize, villainize, and dehumanize. And so the prophetic voice is to say, how do we step in to make sure, not just here in America, Mr. Frierson, how do we say, what can we do to make sure, not just here in America, but worldwide, what steps can be taken to prevent the minimization, the vilification, and the humanization of people? What would you say?
The prophet spoke in Hosea 4:6.
Mm-hmm.
My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge.
Okay.
Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject thee. Thou shalt be no priest to me. Seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy God, I will also forget thy children. And so when we don't venerate, embrace, and spread the word about those who came before us and what they did, then we are actually doing a disservice to our ancestors, to our children, and to ourselves.
So it's the educational process. We don't educate ourselves.
There we go. We need to educate, and not necessarily just going to a school, because there's this thing about critical race theory now that is not taught in schools, that it's a dog whistle, because there are whites in this country of America do not want to, I'm going to say, embrace the fact that their foreparents were criminal-minded, immoral people who actually got the law written so as to enslave an entire ethnic group.
Okay, so listen to what you're saying about critical race theory. Critical race theory is taught in law schools and universities, okay? Critical race theory, what it does is it takes an unfiltered look and examination of history and records it not in such a way that it favors one group or the other, but it's shown in such a way that people can learn and learn from an objective perspective. Now, in the Bible, for example, this critical learning of how people, and really German theologians in the 19th century, how they their critique of the Bible was such a way in which they took away the cultural trappings that may want to tilt religion in a certain way, but they approach it in a way so that people can see the truth. And this is what I've learned, Mr. Frierson. And I'm glad you brought this thing up. I've learned this. We can hate the sin and love the sinner.
Amen.
And what does that do? It shifts something. Because if people think we hate the sinner, then there's no way that we can address the sin. Critical race theory makes us look at the sin. And some people are afraid to examine the sin. You'd like to share with that?
Yes, sir. And in fact, in saying that, most of you here, you probably have never heard of this man. And this is St. Augustine of Hippo.
Yes.
St. Augustine, Florida is the oldest continuous inhabited city in this country, the country of the United States.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And it was found in what we call Spanish Florida. However, the British went and took it over, and they actually, they did their thing. But again, St. Augustine of Hippo was a black man.
That's right.
Born on November the 13th, 354 A.D. He passed on the 20th of August, 430 A.D. And I like that date, 20th of August, because in 1963 there was a march over Washington by another preacher. I'll take it back. Two more preachers, called Reverend James Beller was also a preacher.
That's
and
right.
then, of course, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Asa Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, and John Lewis. And there was a black female that was there that most of us have never heard of. Her name was Josephine Baker.
That's right.
She was an entertainer from St. Louis who was not allowed to perform in America. She went over to France, and they embraced her. And while she was over there and she fell in love with her adopted country, she served in the military. And she was given the Legion of Honor by Charles de Gaulle, one of their great men of France, on the 19th of August of 1961. This young black lady, and just before Dr. King spoke on August the 28th, 1963, she spoke.
That's right. Learning a piece of history. I see you have another picture there of Mother Emanuel, African Methodist Episcopal Church. You want to share with us about
Yes, sir.
that?
Mother Emanuel, AME Church, the second oldest AME church in the world, not just in the United States. Only Bethel AME Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, is older than Mother Emanuel. But it definitely is the oldest AME church in the South. And back on May the 30th of 1822, there was a meeting by Denmark Vesey, who was a member of Mother Emanuel, and others. And then one that was there that looked like us, named George Wilson, he went and told his white slave owners and masters what they were planning. And on July the 2nd, 1822, Denmark Vesey and 34 others were hanged simply because they wanted to be free.
Let me share something.
Yes, sir.
3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, I taught that when I started the Bible lesson, the prophetic voice of the African American Church in American history, I talked about that. And it is very interesting that you brought that up. It was rumored all over Charleston that something was going to take place, and they started planning this in the spring and May, and they were looking at making it happen in July. But Mr. Frierson, you're absolutely right. It was someone in the midst who went and told of the plan, and it changed the course of history, of course. But sometimes it tells you always got to be careful who's in your circle. You have something else you want to share?
Well, I want to go to this back to Mother. 6 years earlier in Camden, South Carolina, on July the 4th, there was a similar incident that happened where his name was Old Scipio. He went to his slave master and told him that there were those that were planning on a slave rebellion. Of course, 5 black men were hung for that, and Old Scipio was granted his freedom, and he was given some money. But I think most of us call that blood money. So he actually was of use to the oppressors. It's kind of like right now, Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, a man who, I think he turned 70 years old yesterday. And a little man, just like Napoleon Bonaparte, these are little men that want to have big names. And so they do things, but they will be remembered. And I'm pretty sure, I don't think he realized how he's going to be remembered. Now this is a law. This is South Carolina Law 59-29-55, which mandates that the history of the black people of South Carolina must be taught. It didn't say it can be, it said it must be.
A law.
It's a law, and it was never repealed. And it just so happened that, look at who's on the back of that pastor.
Emmett Till.
Which was 11 years after George Stenny Jr. Now, the AME Church is the oldest church that's owned and established by blacks.
The Mexican church in the world.
Yeah, in the world. And so Mother Bethel and Mother Emanuel, the first two, Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, and Charleston, the Queen City, kind of the holy city, I'm sorry.
Yes.
So when you equate that, the city of brotherly love and the holy city, but look at what happened at the holy city with Denmark Vesey and others. And I say that because this family, this is the Briggs family from 1949.
You know what we're talking about. What does it lead up to?
They were members of St. Mark AME Church in Summerton, Clarendon, South Carolina, and they got together and they said, we want better for our children. And there was a list signed, and Mr. Harry Briggs Sr., Miss Eliza Gamble Briggs, and Harry Briggs Jr. are the first three names on that petition. And that case, Briggs v. Elliott, was the first of the 5 cases that were combined and made into Brown versus the Board of Education.
And Mr. Frierson.
Yes, sir.
This is in South Carolina. Now, what town was it in again?
Somerton.
Somerton. How far is Somerton from Maysville?
Somerton is probably around about 24 miles.
And let me just say this to you. This is just a pause break.
Yes, sir.
And why I love what we're doing, and we have Mr. Frierson here, and I am noticing time. But you know why this is great? Because history needs to be taught in such a way that people can see with a broader vision of how people can still learn from their past. If you don't know where you've been, you don't know where you are going. And that's why it is good to have this prophetic voice. And the thing is, what I like, what's happening, is that people are seeing South Carolina, out of all of the 50 states, has probably played the most significant role in American history.
Amen.
And if you look at the deep roots of South Carolina, who came up out of South Carolina, and what we're learning just briefly by this historian right here, as he's tying it all together, Brown v. Board of Education, its roots and foundation, the roots, Somerton, South Carolina, the Briggs case. Just think about the magnitude. Now, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be teaching about Special Order Number 15. People don't know about that. Okay. That came from General George Tecumseh Sherman in January 1865, when he was in Savannah, Georgia, when he met with 20 religious leaders, African-American leaders, former slaves, and he talked about from South Carolina, he talked about from the islands off of Charleston, Hilton Head, down the coast into Florida, how it would be a place for former slaves to own and develop from South Carolina on down. And so this is where people get the 40 acres and a mule thing. So this is a historical journey that we're on. And I'm glad to hear how people talk so much about Brown v. Board of Education. Its roots, South Carolina, and Somerton, South Carolina, and we learned about the 40 acres and a mule, where that came from. And I'm going to be taking a trip down to Savannah, and I don't know who I'll be speaking with down there if we could do it. But it's part of the lesson. And you have some more.
And three of the people that General Sherman was speaking to were South Carolinians.
That's right.
Aaron Bradley, a senator from South Carolina. Well, he was from South Carolina, but he was a senator in Georgia. The 12th bishop of the AME Church, Henry McNeil Turner.
That's right.
And then Reverend Ulysses Houston.
That is, I've been looking it up. I'm going to share it. That's right.
And these were three of the contingents from Georgia who were expelled by the Georgia State Legislature. And so Georgia was not allowed to be readmitted into the Union until they corrected that fault. And so it is amazing now. This young man here, this is the 136th bishop of the AME Church. This is the Honorable Ronnie Elijah Brailsford Sr., and he's the 136th bishop of the AME Church. He is the valedictorian of the class of 1976 of Scotch Ranch High School in Somerton, Clarendon County, South Carolina.
And let me tell you something. Let me talk about Bishop Brailsford now. There are 3 books that I've been reading as a background. I'm looking at the time, and we might not be able to get all the slide. But I'm reading a book, Mighty Like a River, The Black Church and Social Reform by Andrew Billingsley. And interestingly, Bishop Brailsford, in the 1980s and 90s, is talked about in this book as being a trailblazer. So you bring him up. Part of the books that I'm reading to help lay the foundation, which I'm sharing with you, they're talking about this giant of a man, Bishop Ronnie Brailsford. But another book, just want to say that I'm sharing with you all to help give us the historical context, is The History of the Negro Church by Carter G. Woodson, and which I recommend. Do not graduate from college or get out of high school without reading The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. Also,
Dr. W.E.B.
Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. And I also recommend you read Alex Haley's autobiography of Malcolm X. You want to share just another?
I think this is how we're going to finish it up, Pastor, because after we are talking about the church, now, this is a letter that was created by Zion Church in Charleston, South Carolina. It's dated 19th of March, 1867. And this is how it goes. Fellow citizens, these are revolutionary times. For many years, a contest, terrible in its nature, has been waged between despotism and republican principles, between freedom and slavery, until finally we behold the genius of republican liberty bearing its echelon upon the threshold of the capital of every nation, waving its banner in triumph over every continent, sea, and ocean. The secret fire pent up in the bosom of the Italian nation, like the fires of Vesuvius, has recently burst forth in all its sublimity, scattering its enmity and unshackling itself from that despotism which trampled under its feet for nearly 2 centuries. Russia has given freedom to over 30 million serfs. Russia. And Germany has recently extricated itself from the despotism of Europe. We find today Canada struggling for liberty, and Ireland too is endeavoring to grasp the flag of liberty. So too with regard to our nation. The little leaven that was planted in this country when the government was founded has succeeded in permeating itself through every fiber of this great body politic. And I'm going to go down. We thank God because he has overruled the desires, the intentions, and the will of men. I'm going to go down. But the overruling hand of providence, whose ways are in the whirlwind, brought good out of the wind. And today we can say, as Joseph said to his brethren, as ye meant evil unto me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass that which has this day saved much people life.
Dr. Frierson, a living historian, we're so thankful that you've taken time to share with us on this beautiful day that the Lord has made on a Wednesday afternoon, bringing history live, the prophetic voice of the African American church in American history. And it is good, my brothers and my sisters, to have a living witness who can share how they fought a fight to clear the name of George Stinney, and how even today, he continues to serve and make a difference in the world. Thank you once again, Mr. George Frierson. We want you all to hit the share and like button. And I look forward to having you join with us on Sunday, 11 o'clock we gather on the corner of 6th and Laurel. We go live at the Historic Jerusalem Baptist Church Facebook page at 11:15. I'm Pastor Reginald Floyd, George Frierson, the curator of the Maysville Historical Museum and the Mary McLeod Bethune Learning and Cultural Center. Thank you again.
My brother, thank you, sir.
God bless you. Take care. Once again, we're listening to Rance Allen. I stood on the banks of Jordan. God bless you. Once again, thank you, my brother. Hope you like. Look forward to sharing with you again soon. Take care.
Yes, sir.